Today on Fortnite, I got second place. I was so close.
Mom, will you get me a snack?
Mom! It's time for adult conversation. With me, your host, Brandy Ferner. Hello, Adult Conversation podcast listeners. I wish this episode weren't so relatable, but it is. Especially during the pandemic when deep fault lines in our relationships seem to be illuminated. So join me as author Lyz Lenz talks about what happened when she realized she was the only one supporting her dream and how she finally got the equality she was seeking. Lyz also shares the dangers of marrying someone with political differences, how to negotiate the contract of marriage, and why it's important to show our kids that there is no invisible lunch-making fairy. There are lots of laughs here as well as ahas, some about our own mothers, and Lyz shows us why when life gives us lemons, we need to throw those lemons at heads rather than turn them into bitter lemonade. On to the show. Today on the podcast, I'm talking with Lyz Lenz, who is a journalist and author advocating for women by way of her writing. Lyz landed on my radar when a friend sent me her recent article for Glamour titled, "It Took Divorce to Make My Marriage Equal." And wow. Holy shit, wow. It discusses so much of what we talk about on the podcast with unequal gender roles and parenting. And so I immediately messaged her asking if she would come here and unpack it with me. And she said yes. So welcome, Lyz.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And the subtitle to your article is, "I spent 12 years fighting for an equal partnership when what I needed was a divorce." Okay, so...
That's my evil laugh.
It's relatable. It's definitely relatable, and the pandemic hasn't helped any of that. But the intention of this episode is not that everyone goes out and gets divorces, of course, because of it. But I want to pick your brain about the lead up to your divorce, how it felt, how you knew it was right for you, what you've learned, if you have any regrets, and also what advice you would give to moms who want to stay married to their husbands, but also want equality. Like, is that even possible in your eyes? Which we will get to. We will get to. Oh, I heard the breath. Like you have a. Do you have a tidy answer already, or is that like a long thing?
Oh, I just like the idea that it might be possible is such a loaded question, and I'm excited to unpack it. But no, I do not have a tidy answer. Okay. But I have a fun answer.
Okay, well, that works. But before we get to that, what do you think the listeners need to know about you?
I think an important thing to keep in mind about me, especially in the context of this conversation, is I grew up evangelical, one of 8 kids. We were homeschooled. So I come from a deeply religious, conservative background. And I think that adds maybe a little bit more credibility to the idea that I would get divorced, because it meant going against everything that I had been raised to believe about life.
Yes. And it's interesting. I've had quite a few guests recently who have talked about having sort of a midlife awakening or really realizing some of the things that they don't want in their life, agreements that they've had that don't fit anymore. And so many of them have come from a similar background with religion. I can't tell you how many times that comes up on here with guests. So there must be something going on, like a mass awakening from that kind of a group. Yeah.
Well, my first book was about religion in America and politics, so maybe it's because they all read my first book.
Maybe so. And what is the title of that book, if anybody wanted to look for it?
So Godland is the name of the first book, and it's a story of faith, loss, and renewal in Middle America, and Belabored is my second book.
Yeah, I love what's the subtitle for Belabored? I love it.
Oh, a vindication of the rights of pregnant women.
Yes. Yeah, that's when I was doing research on you and I saw that book and I was like, oh, I have to email her. I have to make this happen. So I wanted to read a quote from your article that I think people will deeply relate to. So it says, I was 33, a mother of two, and bone tired. I didn't want the laundry and chores to be the rest of my life. I didn't want to always be drowning in work and childcare and house cleaning and dinner, bearing the brunt of the labor. I'd spent the past 2 years begging for help with the kids and housework, only to be told that I could just quit my job if it was all too much. It's not too much, I'd said over and over. It's just not all my job. Standing in the dining room, overwhelmed with the weight of my life, I broke. Will you walk us through what your motherhood experience was like that led you to break?
Well, there were so many things, but like so many women, I got married and I got married at 22, which was a big radical feminist statement for my family. And I believed that my marriage was an equal partnership. After marriage, we slowly slid into gender roles, right? But I justified it, and we both justified it as, well, he likes to mow the lawn. And actually, I did mow the lawn in the beginning, but I didn't mow it correctly, so I was cut off of lawn mowing duties.
Oh, no.
I know, but, we justified it as, I justified it as, I can only speak for myself, as I'm not being stereotypical. I'm just better at cooking. I'm just better at cleaning. I'm just better at this. And I think a lot of us fall into that justification, so that by the time we had children, and we had children 5 years after we got married, that the moment that baby was born, our first baby was born, it immediately was all me. I remember saying, like, can't you save up, vacation and take a lot of time off? Well, I don't really want to. His boss had given him a few days, but as we all know, that's not enough time. And then it just kind of spiraled from there. I think what, in hindsight, was something I didn't realize was that there was never gonna be equality, that this expectation I had gone in with was not a mutual agreement. That, I had been saying things like, okay, well, we'll move here for your job, but then eventually we'll move for my job so I can get a job because I'm a writer and we were moving to the middle of Iowa. And if you know anything about Iowa, you know that we have a lot of writers who come here and then leave for an MFA. And it's a great program, but it was a program that was not interested in accepting me. And
shoot.
No knock on them, but there's not like a wealth of writing opportunities,
Right.
and so I was like, well, then eventually we'll move. And the answer was always, we'll see, which when you're young and you're in love, you're like, okay, great, got a bargain.
Right.
Yeah. And I do think a bigger picture issue is, women are always used to getting the scraps. So if your scrap feels a little bigger than what you used to get, then you're like, hell yeah, I made it out alive. So it was a struggle. But like with any struggle, and I think any woman has felt this, it's like, okay, my partner's clearly failing here, but I still care for them deeply. So what else can I do? What else can I jerry rig here? And it became like a Rube Goldberg contraption of like asking parents to help out, hiring babysitters, hiring a house cleaner when we could afford it, extensively planning meals. And it was just this really complicated issue. And so after our second child was born and I achieved my dream of selling not one but 2 books within 7 months of each other, I was elated. Yeah, and it was cool, right? It was great.
Yeah.
But I remember that day signing my first book contract and coming home because I had been out meeting people. I was also trying to plan like a literary event at the time, and coming home and being asked, well, what's for dinner? And I had texted, I've been like, I signed my first book contract today. And, we kind of knew it was coming. And I was like, it's here. I'm sending in the paperwork. It was also my birthday. And so I came home to What's for dinner? Nothing. And of course, we've all fallen down as partners, I think, right? So that's not
right.
But it ended up being emblematic in my future career success. And right after that, we immediately started. I had been in therapy for a while because I feel like any good, healthy person should get some therapy. It's great, wonderful. I highly recommend it. But at that point, I was like, okay, we need to start opening this up. And if people read my first book, you know that we had also as a couple, and this is a little crazy, but go with me, we had tried to start a church.
Wow.
And that had just failed miserably right after my youngest first birthday. And so we had some issues coming out of that we needed to discuss, issues where I had been told I was too loud, and as a woman, I didn't have a voice, and I felt unsupported in that. And so a lot of that's in the first book. And so there were all of those things going into this moment where I was trying so hard to make my dream work, and I realized I'm the only one trying to make it work. And flash forward to the point of the breaking, we had been in therapy for 2 years. I had been doing everything to keep the frayed ends of my life together. And I remembered a friend had told me, your life is not a game of chicken. You don't have to wait for the other person to blink first. And that the truth of that statement just washed over me in that moment where I was like, this is the rest of my life. I'm fighting so hard to change it, but it's never going to change. And I need to either accept that this is my reality or I need to blow it up. And so I chose to blow it up.
Yeah, totally. I can see why. I mean, mowing the lawn, not mowing the lawn, number one, but then all the things you're talking about. So in hindsight, are you so happy that church didn't work out?
Well, it was never gonna work out. There's no parallel universe where that church works out for so many, many reasons. But yes, I think it really brought to light some of our fundamental differences. And I've written about this in other places too. Please keep in mind, we're talking about one small article and my life is longer and bigger.
Yes.
But we were a politically divided household. And since I had grown up in places where I was usually the token liberal, that felt fine to me. And I think this is particularly relevant to our current moment.
Yes.
Because I had always been the one making do, making concessions, because I was always the odd voice out, that when we got married, to me, I was like, well, it's just political differences. We can overcome this. And obviously, I'm an upper middle class white lady. Well, middle class, let's be real. Not that rich. I've seen what constitutes middle and upper middle class. Trust me, we're getting by, but it's not pretty. But I had done that thing where I was like, well, can't we all just get along? And if we all just agree on some core issues, we'll be okay. And what I learned, I think, from the failure of the church is that we're not. The politics isn't just some sort of rhetorical game, that it's people's lives on the line. Yes. And I'm sad to say it took my life and my voice being on the line for me to see that. And that's the thing that I think I'm the most ashamed about. But
yeah. Wow. And what you're talking about with being a politically divided household and thinking, oh, it's just political. It's that's all it is. You're exactly right that especially it seems like these days, we're not just talking about the deficit. We are talking about actual life-changing issues for ourselves and for other people and for people who don't have as much and for women. I mean, for people of color, like so many different people that I think there's a lot of marriages that are on the brink. And I think part of it can be this political divide and exactly what you're talking about, which is you're waking up to the fact that this isn't just like a sports team, like I like the Broncos and you like the Raiders. It's something so much deeper. And in fact, it's partially too the way that you are treated by your spouse. Like those politics come through the way that you're treated. And that's a big deal. That's like politics seep into our homes.
It's also important to note that my breakup is coming in the wake of the 2016 election. And I myself am a survivor of sexual assault. One of my younger sisters is a survivor of sexual assault. And I'm not speaking for myself. For so many people in America, that election was personal.
Yes.
And to look at the person who said that they loved me, who had gone into that voting booth and voted the other way, voted in a way that undermined my value as a human being, was not something I could just get over. And I do think a lot of us are, you said something about like, oh, also this is how the person treats you. I would also push against that a little bit because I've heard from so many women who are or were in similar situations. And I say, just because he treats you right doesn't mean he's treating other people right too, because that is an act of violence to go into a voting booth and vote to strip other people of their rights. And so I think we're actually having this conversation right now, and I'm sorry to do this to you, but with the Supreme Court nomination, where everybody says, oh, Amy Coney Barrett, she's so kind, she's so wonderful. And it's like, you can be a kind, wonderful human being who's easy to talk to, who works to structurally dismantle the rights of other people. You can benefit from patriarchy and still support it. And so I think that's also another issue at play here, where I will be real. I benefited from patriarchy in so many ways, but because, like I said at the beginning, I was coming out of like a really restrictive, background, that to me, it had felt like liberation for a little bit until it felt like a jail.
Wow. And something that you said, I want to go back to about how you realized that it wasn't a mutual agreement when you got married, that you were not actually on the same page. I think that that's an interesting piece of it too, because I think sometimes people can go back and go, you know what, it was never going to be equal. And then I think that there's other couples who go, no, we started this thing equal. Like he's a feminist, or, we were both working and we were both supporting each other and each other's dreams, and then kids derail that. So It's like, I think there's a lot of different ways that it can look, but.
Well, and I don't think our society sets it up for equality too.
No, God, no.
And you don't hear me saying this much, but in defense of men, we don't, schools don't expect fathers to pitch in as much as they expect mothers. They often don't send fathers a lot of the emails that they would send mothers, right? Like there is a societal, if a man goes out with his child, it's, oh my gosh, look at you, you're such a great dad. If a woman goes out without her child, it's, where's your baby? Right? Yeah. We have these cultural constructs that expect more of women than we do of men. And if a man kind of achieves it, we're all like, look at that, he's such a hot dad or whatever. And it's like, please. But I also think women undermine ourselves too, because we're given so much responsibility, because we have so much societal expectation. We cannot let it go. Like we can't be like, oh, he dressed the baby in a onesie but put it on backwards. We can't just laugh that off, right? Like it's too many of us are like, fine, I'll do it myself and then you'll never dress the baby ever again, right. And so there's multiple factors here, but, I do think systemic change needs to enable those cultural changes, right? We need parental leave, paid parental leave for both parents. So they're in the thick of it in the beginning. And I know so many dads who'd love that. But so many marriages start off with the expectation of equality and then kind of devolve for whatever reason into an unequal partnership. And, I've heard lots of dads talk, and I actually almost punched a dad recently. I went to visit my brother and his wife, and they have this lovely neighborhood and it's wonderful, and people talk to each other, and we were outside, and everything's so just like all the parents work. The children have very modern names. The houses all look like they were decorated by Joanna Gaines. And it's so beautiful. But one of the dads who kind of follows my work, which is very flattering, was saying things like, he was like, well, talk to me about your book. Well, talk to me about your book. And I'm like, I'm so tired. I don't really want to talk about my book right here on this lawn while I'm drinking a LaCroix. But right. He was like, well, I want to be equal, but she just does it better. Oh, I wanted to slap him in the face. He didn't deserve it, but maybe a little bit. But
also to ask you about I want to talk about your book, but what I want to do is mansplain your book to you. Like, what?
Right. She does it better. She does it. And it's like, you hear men say that as if it's some sort of badge of honor for a woman. Right. To do it better. It's like, sir, we don't want to do it better. And there's this expectation of women, and we do this in society all the time. We're like, moms, they're martyrs. They're literally bleeding on the floor, but they still manage to get it done. Look at those mothers. And the mothers are bleeding on the floor screaming, help us, help us. And people are like, here's your Mother's Day card.
It's
it's like, you know what? Fuck Mother's Day cards. Give us some paid parental leave and some fucking child care. You can cancel Mother's Day for the rest of our lives. I feel like if I ran on that political platform, I'd get 100% of the female vote. Well, you still maybe 98%.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's true. That, and if you also ran on doing away with daylight savings time so that kids' naps and nighttime schedule so that we don't do that switch, I feel like that would be you'd have a winning platform right there.
Why? Why does that still exist? Why?
I don't know, and I feel like the pandemic is a great time to change that, but of course.
Right, because all time is the same now. I literally don't know what time it is. I'm sitting here in a bathrobe drinking tea. I don't know what time it is.
But there's another piece that you said too that really hit me when you were talking about the idea of a partnership. Marriage is a partnership, and it's also love. And those are almost like a right brain and left brain, masculine, feminine, those are two yin yang. How many symbols can I give? But it's like this idea of the more logical thing and the left brain thing, which is like the partnership and how it works. And then this love thing, which is you kind of can't put your finger on it and it's flowy. And I think that that's part of why women part, because there's so many other reasons of why women stay in marriages that are awful partnerships, because you can love somebody, but if you had to work with them, you would fire them immediately. And that's where I think there's this gray area, because if both, let's say, for example, if a husband and wife, if how they take care of the kids and the home and all of that managerial stuff and caretaking, if they're both supposed to do an equal job and one of them is carrying 80% of the weight, the other one is carrying the other 20, that person, if we were looking at this as a job, should be fired. But then there's these feelings that come up, right? This but love. And so then, and of course you have women conditioned to sort of look past that and feel those feelings more and to not hold other people accountable and to put their needs second and last really, and all of these other things. But it's that sussing out of how can you get somebody, I don't even know how I would say it. How can you deal with both of those things? Your love for the person may not have changed, but they may be the world's worst, quote unquote, employee. And then what do you do with that? And I'm not expecting you to have the answer. I just think that that's a place where a lot of women find themselves is you may love somebody and you may even be on the same page with them politically, and they may be trying their best. But at the end of the day, if you're living with somebody who's pulling 20% of the weight, and you constantly are like, I want to fire you from this job, and you can't. How do you rectify that?
I have a friend whose husband is a feminist professor, and they love each other so much. He does not do 50% of the work,
right.
and it's so funny to hear her. It's not funny. It's funny as in we laugh because if we cry, we'd never stop crying. But He knows the language. He wants to do the work, but just doesn't do it, doesn't see it. He's not conditioned to do it. He's not conditioned to see it. And she'll also say, there were times where I just got shit done instead of having the fight with him. I do think a couple things are at play. this is a systemic issue. And there was this great study that the New York Times reported on in their parenting section, which talked about how men think, like, was 90-something% of men in partnerships believe they were doing equal work, and only
I read that.
3% of the women agreed.
Yes. Yeah, they think they're doing more. Yep.
Right, because I think they're doing more than their dads, right? And so, and hopefully then their sons will do better, and so on and so forth. But we're in a pandemic. Women are struggling right now. So I think a couple issues are at play. You know, it's systemic. Employers don't expect that a father will be doing work. We don't give men, parental leave right up top. Well, we don't really give anybody parental leave, so there's that. And childcare is an unequal load. So when you have a system balanced against you, any individual choices that you make to try to make it work are always going to be frustrated by the system, which is why I always try to focus more on let's enact some actual change in America rather than telling women to lean in so far they're going to fall off the cliff.
Yeah, that's part of my hatred of self-care too. Self-care just feels like the most ridiculous, like, oh, we'll take care of everybody else, but then don't forget yourself because we're not going to pass legislation that helps you. So you'll do it. And then actually you'll tell other women to self-care. And then we'll be absolved of any responsibility for treating you humanely. It's like, Jesus.
And yes, no, and self-care is also this just like really white lady concept, because like what does self-care look like to a Black woman? It looks like society not shooting her son in the street. Like it's also like it's very, a bubble bath isn't fucking gonna solve these problems. But I will say, I think marriage therapy is really key if you can find a good therapist, to find a way to say, we have to talk about these things. And I wouldn't say marriage therapy didn't work for us. Obviously, we ended it. I don't consider that end a failure. I consider it a success, because I consider any time you can look at something and say, this is not working and I am not happy, and walk away from it, knowing you did everything to make it work and to be happy, I consider that a success. I consider a life well lived a success. And one of the reasons I do write so openly about my divorce is because I want to change that conversation around that choice. I want women to stop talking about it in secret. I want to stop having these secret divorced moms clubs, which immediately the moment they happen, literally any mom will tell you, you get divorced, all these women slip into your text messages, your DMs, and go, I'm thinking about it. What's it like? Or, oh, I had one. And like people you didn't even know were divorced who were like, I had one when I was 22. Don't tell anybody. And you're like, what the hell? What's going on? Let's just talk about it. But, I do want to change that conversation, because I do think it is an option. I remember that one of the most radical things somebody told me is I was, I had been in marriage therapy for about 2 years. We were going all the time. We were doing all the things. And I remember looking at a friend and saying, he's not cheating on me. Nobody's being hit, which is how I was raised. That was the only acceptable way to have a divorce, right? And I said, but I'm miserable, and I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my life. This is going to be like a Shirley Jackson situation. I don't know if you know much about her marriage or life, but anyway, Google it. It's not perhaps the model that anybody wants to live their life by.
Okay.
And I said, although she's a genius and wonderful and life is complicated, I'm not here to judge anybody. But I remember saying to my friend, like, what if I'm just miserable? Like, maybe is that, and I was like, is being happy enough of a reason to blow up your life? And he was like, yes. It is. And I've literally, because that's another thing we do. We tell women, you don't deserve to be happy. That life is a struggle. Only good things come from struggle and pain. And, oh, this bad thing happened to you, you're sexually assaulted. We'll find the silver lining, right?
Exactly.
We have this narrative, this myth in America that somehow your life is just kind of supposed to be miserable and bad. And you're just supposed to kind of just constantly be taking, like turning lemons into lemonade. And I'm like, what if you just like took the lemon and tossed it at the head of the person who gave it to you and said, I don't fucking want your fucking lemons. So how about that for a change?
I love that. That's like the, the burning it down theory that you're talking about. I think you're right that the happiness, like that's not nothing. That's not little. The happiness, I mean, it might even be one of the biggest things, but we're made to feel, like you said, that we can only do it if he's hitting us, if he's having an affair on us, if it's all of these awful things. And I know on Facebook and other social media, there's moms groups. And I mean, this is happening right now. The mass evacuation of marriage seems to be happening. I mean, every day there's a post where a woman's saying, I finally ended it today. I'm so scared. This feels awful. I'm second guessing. And then there's, 100 comments from other women going, the beginning is so hard and I've never been happier in my life. And these women reclaiming these parts of themselves and these, and like you said, finding this equality, which is actually something I want to ask you about. Oh my gosh, one of the things that stopped me when I was reading your article was this part where you were talking about what it was like after you were divorced and you were living on your own. And it said, I also didn't have to convince someone else to let me outsource household cleaning. In the end, I didn't need to hire anyone at all because my house was cleaner. In renegotiating my life, I had negotiated a better deal for myself and it was court ordered. I no longer begged to shift even some of the burden or childcare or housekeeping onto my husband. Our custody agreement mandated that he and I bear an equal share. And the part about your house being cleaner and not needing a house cleaner, I think all of us moms secretly think like, if I lived alone, I would use one plate and one cup and my trash can wouldn't need to be emptied for weeks. So you are basically telling us that, yes, we are right about this, that the things that we need, the overwhelm of all the people's stuff when we're by ourselves, that goes away, or even just us and our kids, there's a certain amount that for you just went away that you didn't even need the thing that you couldn't even get in the first place.
So I grew up, like I said, one of 8 kids, and then I went to college and lived with a roommate, and then I got married. And so, except for 1 year in college, I had never lived on my own before.
Okay.
And I had always thought, like, I'd always believed, oh, I'm the messy one. Although that 1 year that I had was like, it was always actually pretty ridiculously tidy. And I derive a lot of joy in having things organized. And right now I have this like cupboard where I have these perfect little plastic containers where like all my flour and sugar are. And it's like the most beautiful thing to me. And I sometimes just open it and look at it for a moment of zen. Is that too much for your listeners? Cut it out.
No.
But I was able to buy those tubs without somebody yelling at me about the cost, anyway. So
yeah,
I actually didn't anticipate that my life would be cleaner. I when I had moved out and I was the one who moved out and I set up this space, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was actually in the back of my mind thinking, okay, I'll have to eventually call the cleaning lady again because I'm still going to need some help. And then like a week went by and my floors were still kind of clean. And I got one of those robot vacuums to like kind of just like clean it up. And actually, an essay I haven't written, but I did kind of pitch it to the same editor. I was like, can I write an essay about how my only functioning relationship right now is with my robot vacuum? And she was like, that's a great one, but let's do this one first. So robot vacuum love letters still forthcoming.
But please. Yes. That sounds amazing. I think we can all relate to that.
Yeah, and I mean, that thing one time sucked up dog poop, and I still love it more than I love most people. But I couldn't help it. But and so I was just like, oh, my counters are still clean. Like, there's no sticky residue. Oh, my bed is made. Oh, my, and then it was this slow, like, realization that I actually was like, because, I've been raised a woman and raised with, in a very conservative home, where like being clean and making food was part of our curriculum, that I was like, oh no, I've actually been primed to do this unconsciously. The problem wasn't me. The problem was I was constantly following behind another person, cleaning up behind that person. And that person had been culturally primed not to see it.
Yes.
My ex brought his laundry home from college for his mom to do. Like, he never noticed when the counter was sticky. And I say this not to throw him under the bus in any sort of way, although.
No, I hear
whatever.
you. It's about the conditioning.
It's about the conditioning, and there's so many good, wonderful men who do this as well. And it sucks. The thing I hate the most is when somebody says, I'm going to leave a dish soaking in the sink. I'm like, you better fucking not on my watch, because I know what that means. I know it means you're going to leave it there for me to clean up later.
Exactly. Yes.
I think the one time I left a dish to soak in the sink post-divorce, I was like worried about myself. I was like, you're doing the thing that you said. And I was like, but it's actually like a really dirty crock pot and it does need to soak for a little while. And then I cleaned it in the next morning, but I was
oh my God, I love the shame of the dirty dish. Yeah. Cause I mean, it's like kind of triggering, right? It's like,
right.
Yeah. Shit.
Am I leaving this work for someone else? Oh no, I'm the only one who has the work to do. So.
Yes. Well, there was another important quote that you had that was about before you had divorced and you were kind of looking at your life, and you said, we'd moved to Cedar Rapids for my husband's dream job in 2005, and the plan was always that eventually we'd move for me. But each year passed and we never did. Once we had kids, even though his job was flexible and his boss was accommodating, I realized it would never be my turn. And I think this is a point that often goes overlooked or not talked about, which is where you decide to live as a couple. And my husband and I recently revisited this conversation, and it's interesting how you can make a choice at a certain era of your life, but then never return to reassess it. And I know for us, we've gone back and forth. We've moved and lived where I wanted to, which then he didn't love. And so then we moved again to where he wanted to. And I remember saying, or thinking to myself, and I think maybe telling a friend, I'd rather live somewhere that makes my husband happy than live with an unhappy husband. But it's not so simple, because then it feels like a trading back and forth of unhappiness unless you can both decide on a certain place that you both like. So, but how common is that both people equally want to be in a certain place? And so there's like a power dynamic there, that when you're living somewhere that someone wants to be and the other person doesn't necessarily want to be, again, how do you rectify that? And I know I was thinking about this as I was thinking about interviewing you, and I was wondering about reading that section, and I don't know, just thinking about my own life and my mom. And I know that my mom moved from her friends and family who lived in Missouri, and then she moved out to Colorado because it was always my dad's dream to live in Colorado. And she was so close to her family. And I think she just accepted that it would be her dream too. But I often wonder what she would have chosen if she'd really had the choice. And I think that this is one of those points that can kind of become like a little bit of an earthquake in a couple that you don't even really notice is there. But if you're living somewhere for one person and then it's the other person never gets their chance to maybe live where they want to live, and and you set down roots and kids in school, and sometimes it's hard to then pull out of it. I think that's something a lot of people don't talk about.
It is so hard to talk about, because what's a choice, right? Like, and I think to go back to systemic issues, women are primed to think they're making a choice when they're really not.
Yes,
I think if you would have asked me in the beginning, and I've thought about this a lot, I would have said, of course I'm making this choice of my own free will, but I didn't have a choice. I mean, I felt like I was making a choice, but I didn't have, I wanted to stay in Minneapolis. That's where my friends and my brother were. I have a big family. We all move around a lot, but my brother is 16 months younger than me. He's one of my best friends. My two best friends from college lived there. It's a bigger city. There were more opportunities. My ex's family still lives there. So I was like, it's just like the perfect place and we can stay there. And then he was like, well, this is my dream job and maybe one day we'll move back. And so I was like, okay, well, I love you. So This feels like a choice to me. But did I have a choice? I mean, the choices were do it or don't get married.
Right. That's exactly right. You're so right about that. Like, we think we have a choice, but really we sort of don't, because it's like it's all or nothing. It's either you do
Right.
this, it's like an ultimatum, either you do this or you like you're not married anymore, or you don't get
Well,
married. Like that's
and the thing with so many women, quote unquote, choosing to leave the workplace, and so many of them will go, no, it was a choice. I was like, really? Because what was your other option? What was your other option? Your child who, needed extra help or had special needs failing? That's not a choice. Like, it's a system that's stacked up against you and then repackaged as a choice when literally you don't have another choice. So that's my rant on choices.
It's so right though. It's so right. And we need to be reminded of that, because I think that we forget, and that's kind of where I think my mom was. And, maybe she was game for, let's go see what Colorado has to offer us. But thinking about these questions and thinking about that today, it was for the first time I was like, what would my mom have wanted? And how wild is that? That in my years as her daughter, I've never thought, what really did my mom want there? Because I think she really would have loved to live near her family. But I think we do that thing, and especially her generation did that thing where it's like, well, you go where your spouse goes. And my mom always says she sometimes will open up and be really honest about her motherhood experience, although most of the time she kind of has these rose-colored glasses about the whole thing. But every once in a while she'll say something like, when I had kids, I realized my life was no longer my own. And she has this very like grave the sound in her voice. And so I just, I wonder about that. But then also, what do you do? And my husband and I have had this conversation. What do you do if each of you wants to be in a different place? Because if you want to stay married, somebody's going to have to give.
Yeah. And women are so primed to be the givers.
Yes.
You're talking about your mom. And of course, my mom homeschooled 8 children.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, she's only, I think, once in the time I've known her as a mother, had a job where she substitute taught. She's trained as a teacher. She's a very intelligent woman. And I remember being 16 and fighting really hard to go on this trip with a friend through her school. We were going to go to London and Paris. And I was like, I will do anything. I ended up actually nannying for triplets the whole summer from like 5 a.m. to like 5 p.m. And it was like, that poor mom, but also like poor me.
Yeah.
But they were wonderful, and she was wonderful and gave me a lot of money that enabled me to afford this trip. But I remember fighting with my mom about it and being like, no, like this is a thing. I can do this and I want to do it and I want to go. And I love my mom. I'm not trying to throw her under the bus here, but I remember her snapping at me and being like, what do you think I would have loved to have done?
Oh,
and that was the first time in my life I had seen my mom as a human being. And in my defense, like you said, mothers of that generation do not show themselves as human beings.
No, they
because
do not.
There's too much at stake. Because if you sit there and you say, oh, maybe I would have made things different, then you, in some ways, it's like wishing away the lives of your children. And I don't think they want to do that. I sometimes tease my mom. I'm like, if you would have stopped at 2 perfect daughters, me and my sister, I was like, you never would have had to put up with this garbage. And she's always like, Elizabeth, no, I would never. I love all my children. It's like, sure you do, but that Kathy, she causes a problem sometimes. And of course, I love all my siblings, and I would never wish away their lives. But that's the thing. It's like, if you open that, it never ends. And so best not to open it. And I remember that moment so often. And I think that's something that's always been in the back of my mind with my own life, is to say, what would I have done? And I want to live the kind of life where I look at my children and I say, no regrets. I don't regret you. I don't regret anything. And I fought hard to make the world a place where you will also have no regrets. And again, I'm not shaming my mom here, but I am saying that women deserve actual choices, and we deserve to be the ones who are not making the sacrifices. And anytime anybody says that, there's always like the one woman who will pop in and be like, well, my husband moved from my job. And you're like, great. Look at the
Right.
statistics. Like, statistically,
Exactly.
that's not the case. And so while I'm very, very happy for you, and I hope you have many, many boy children to populate
Right.
the earth with those types of men, like, don't
Yes.
ignore that this is a systemic issue.
That part about it being our seeing our own mothers as human, that was something
Yes.
that I knew that I wanted to do differently. And again, not any shade on my own mom, but I felt almost like, oh mom, you should have, for your own good, not, I mean, she didn't do, like, I don't know that she did damage to me by it, but like for her
Right.
own good, show us that you deserve a break. Show us that you deserve for us not to just expect that you're going to make a meal when we can make it ourselves, all these things. And I felt like that was really important for me to do for my own kids, so they saw me as a human being. And and then the question is like, well, how, like, what's too human? So there's always on the podcast, I'm like, there's this fine line I'm always trying to get right in the middle, and I don't know that it exists, but I think that that's important, because then it allows them to be human when they go forward. I don't think that there's any downside to people showing their humanity. I think, again, probably to a certain extent, but I think that that only serves everybody. And then maybe our kids will fight for our rights, fight for other people who deserve to have rights. I just think it's a more humane way to live, rather than sort of skirting the issue, not talking about it because then maybe it'll go away or it's too painful. Like, we have to talk about these things.
Well, we save no one's life when we nail mothers on a cross.
Yeah.
All we
Yes.
do is just nail mothers on a cross. And that's what we continually do. And we need to stop. And we need to take our own selves off of our martyr cross and say, this isn't getting us anywhere. And again, advocate for systemic change, because these are systemic issues. One of the things that I've also loved about divorce is my kids see up close and personal, not just their dad doing work, for them. They see him making their lunches, they see him making them dinner, but they also see me doing work that they wouldn't have seen before. I think very recently, they're 9 and 7, and there was, I was asking them to clean the kitchen, and, I was like, tonight's the night where we're going to instruct, right, on cleaning the kitchen. Here's the right way to wipe the counter, and here's all the things, and here's how we do it.
Yeah.
And, my daughter was like, oh, this is taking so long. And then when this is all done, all we have to do is make our lunches. It's going to take all night. And I looked at her and I go, yeah. And who do you think does it? And she's like, oh, okay. And
Yes.
it's like, there is no invisible lunch fairy in this home. It is me. And it is you. And there's no invisible laundry fairy. It is all of us. And so I really appreciate that I no longer have the ability to hide that from them, because it was like, well, when dad would come home and be the fun dad and then read books while I cleaned the kitchen and started laundry and started lunches, that labor was invisible.
Right.
But now the labor can no longer be invisible, and they see it and understand it, and that changes our conversations, and it changes my fundamental approach to parenting. Like I make them make their lunches, they fold clothes,
Yes. Right.
and mostly for my survival. It's not because I'm like, oh, I'm such a good mom. It's mostly like, oh my God, somebody empty this dishwasher because the dog just puked. Like,
right.
the cat brought a chipmunk into the house. Help! Which is a thing that happened recently, so.
Oh gosh, right. No, but you're so right. These are important things. And I think it's so valuable for our kids. Like that moment that you had where you said, who do you think does this? That interrupts the script of conditioning. That's like this magic fairy that happens to be a female does all of these things. Like for your son and your daughter, they both had this moment of like, but wait a minute. It's like the Matrix, it's like all of a sudden they saw like, oh, wait a minute, what's really happening behind here is this. I feel like that is so, so valuable. I think our kids need it. And I think it's one of the only ways that they're going to grow up and not continue some of the problematic conditioning and norms, gender norms that we have.
And the other side to that is they see me as a working person. I love that my job, and I realize this isn't with all jobs, but I love that there have been times when I've had to sit my kids down and be like, be quiet, be on your iPads. I have to interview somebody. And they hear me do it, and they hear me asking questions, and, I'll be like, time for bed. We got to go to bed on time because I have to finish a chapter tonight. And I try to talk to them about my work. One, I really just enjoy talking to my children. Hopefully this isn't annoying. I enjoy their company, but I enjoy their company because I'm not burnt out on it because there's an equal parenting load. So
that's everything. Yes, that's everything.
Yes. And that said, I mean, I think that's a little bit of the privilege there with that. But they get to see a woman being a mom, also working, also handling the other things that I handle. And I try not to, they don't know the amount of hate mail that I get.
Right.
Although, I did take them to a vigil for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I was going to speak at it. And of course, we're all outside, socially distanced, and I gave my kids like a big giant blanket. I was like, sit on this blanket, don't move. If somebody talks to you, keep your mask on, right? Like, and when I got up to speak, somebody in the back booed me very loudly.
Oh.
And as is their right, but it caused a lot of interesting questions on the way home, where my daughter is like, why would somebody treat another person like that?
Oh.
Like, why would they do that to you? And again, it was easy to contextualize in the context of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life. And so we had a bigger conversation about women and opinions and everything. But like, I only brought them to that because I had no other choices, because I didn't have childcare. There wasn't anybody at home. And I'm so glad I did. You know what I mean? Like, wow. I'm so glad I've had to. My town was hit by a derecho, which is kind of like an inland hurricane. And in the aftermath of that, my life always gets crazier the more crazy the world is, because I also work as a newspaper columnist.
Yes.
And at some point, I had to throw them in the car with me so I could drive out to interview somebody. And then my friend came to like pick them up and take them out for lunch. But like, they saw that. And again, it's tough, but I don't regret any of that, because they see someone making it work. And God, if I can model anything to my kids, it's that like you can have a life that is complex and beautiful and interesting and is not defined by how sticky your counters are.
I love that, because then you're like, and also tonight we're going to learn the right way to clean a sticky counter.
Look, there is a right way and a wrong way to wipe a counter. And I swear to God, if you do not know how to scoop the crap into the palm of your hands, if you're just dumping it on the floor, then you have no business talking to me or being inside of my home.
Yeah, I fully support that stance. Oh my gosh, when they just brush it off the table and you're like, oh my God, why would you think that was okay?
Why would you give so much work for our Beepo, our robot vacuum, because he has a name? But my son's hands are so small, because he's kind of a little guy, that like, he's like, well, I was trying, but it just fell out of my hands.
Oh, well, that's adorable.
Yeah, I know. What a sucker I am to fall for that hand too small excuse.
Yes. But it's also real.
It's also real.
I want to make sure that we talk about what I mentioned at the beginning. Do you think that it is possible for marriages to be equal?
I wouldn't do the work I do if I didn't think we could make the world better. I say that to like vaguely answer your question.
I know, I'm like, that's like the not answer. That's like, I think what's
that's the
happening
politician answer.
Yes, I feel like what you want to say is, hell no. But then you're like, but I think for some people, the world is a great place. Like,
I think one day it will be more possible if instead of looking at our individual lives, we start looking at the system as a whole. That is a problem with motherhood books. And I love a lot of motherhood books, but a problem with them is they focus only on the individual and not the system. And so I say, okay, yes, I hope one day it is possible for us to have truly equal marriages without the benefit of a court mandate. But
Right.
until that happens, do what you have to do to survive, first of all, because we're living in a time when, we need you to survive. But also make your conversations about the system. Vote for the people who are going to change the system. Don't vote for the people who are going to give you a better tax break if you hire a nanny. Like, that's just for you. Try to change the system, because you don't know what's going to happen to your kids, or it's not even about your kids. Care about other people.
Yes.
Just do it. Just try. Like, care about other people. And so, my thing is, I hope it's possible. I'm living my life as if one day it's possible. I have some real questions about whether what I believe is true or not, but that doesn't matter. I'm going to keep fighting for it anyway, and I hope other people do. And I hope that our fights look like, especially in this moment, especially in pandemic, especially, for my town and so many other places in America have dealt with natural disasters. And now we're struggling with school, and now women are being forced out of the workplace. Please stay in the workforce, please, if you can, please. But also, we have a chance right now to rebuild, and we have a chance to make an even better argument for the fact that motherhood in America is too big to fail, and we need a systemic investment in it for all people. And then you can go to your marriage therapist and learn how to lean in. But until then, let's make this fight about more than just our individual misery. And I think we have a real shot at it. I think we do.
Right. No, I hear you on that. And I think because there's the macrocosm and the microcosm, like on the macro level, yes, because I'm with you about the systemic. And then on the individual, I know that my husband and I sometimes say, like, God, I wish I didn't like you so much, because then we could get a divorce and we both would get a break, and we both have these cool apartments. And I know that this is like a romanticizing of privilege, and it's, there's so much that goes with divorce that is not great and does not feel good and is stressful. So I don't mean to downplay any of that, but it's this interesting idea, like, how broken are things that couples who love each other and enjoy each other are like, God, if we could only get divorced so that we had some breathing room. And I actually think it's an interesting idea. What if, you'd have to have money, and we wouldn't have the money to do it. But like, what if you did have separate, and I almost think like you could rent them out. This should be something in the future where you can like rent out these rooms. And my friends and I have all joked, like, we should get an apartment and then we split it. And of course we could like never afford to do it, but then we split it and each of us gets a certain day. And then you have this tidy space where you can go and think your thoughts. But what I do want to say, and I wrote an article about it for Filter Free Parents about why it's so important to get this break in this space away. But one of the things that I think is so helpful is finding these ways. And of course, if you have a spouse who isn't supportive, it's exponentially harder. But finding a way to get these little spaces that you can without having to get divorced if you love and respect the person that you're with, who is doing a mostly great job at the partnership, who you don't want to fire on a daily basis. It's so important and it's so hard. And that's why it always kills me with self-care, because it's like, well, wait a minute. To get self-care, I have to beg somebody to take my kids, and then I have to make up for the time that I'm gone. Like, that's not actually self-care. Anyway, I could go on about self-care forever.
I think you're hitting on an interesting issue, because at its core, marriage is simply a contract. And I was raised by a corporate lawyer. So the contract should be up for renegotiation. And what if you just looked at this person and said, okay, at this point next year, we're going to sit down and we're going to look at our contract and we're going to see if it's working for us. And if it's not working for us, we're going to suggest some changes, right? Maybe I get Tuesday Thursday or whatever from 5 to 9 where I'm gone. And obviously, privilege plays into this, and
yes, right.
and jobs, and also there's a pandemic. So, but what if you approached your marriage as a contract and said, I love you, that is not the issue. The issue is I'm breaking from all of this. And of course, they probably are breaking too. So what can we renegotiate here to where we are both getting our needs met? And I think it's worth it, because for centuries, marriage was simply a money contract where women were basically just exchanged for money. So it's only recently that marriage has become about love. And I think marriage should be about love, by the way. Yeah. But I also think at its core, it is a contract. Nowhere in the contract does it say you have to do all the work. So sit down, make a list of the chores, talk about who does what. I mean, be practical about it in the same way that you'd be practical about a budget. And, I think that that's a conversation worth having if your marriage is a marriage worth saving. And that's also something you have to decide for yourself. And that is something you have to decide for yourself, all on your own. Nobody can decide it for you. So that's also worth keeping in mind. But yeah, marriage is just a contract. Try to get a better deal. Negotiate.
Right. It's like do a refi. Let's do a refi on this. And then also,
yes!
if you can't have the conversation with your spouse, I think that's also something that is that you might need to know. You might need to know, if I can't even come to them with this, if I already feel like I'm walking on eggshells or they'll laugh me out of the room, that's a piece of information you might want to know.
Well, that's a big thing, right? Because if you feel like, well, I don't even feel safe having this conversation, then I think that that's something you should sit down with a therapist and talk about. Because whatever else happens in a marriage, no matter what you think about it, no matter your religious background, you should be able to have those conversations with that person without feeling afraid.
Absolutely.
And without feeling like you're going to lose everything. And if that is, and if that's a reality, by the way, I recommend the book, The Gift of Fear. It just kind of talks about trusting your gut and your instinct, and that not to gaslight yourself about situations that don't feel good. And, I would encourage every woman to read that regardless of who they are, who they're married to, or whatever situation they're in. But if you feel a certain way, it's not for nothing. Don't gaslight yourself. Right. Listen to yourself. Sit with your feelings. Talk to a therapist. If you can't afford a therapist, talk to a friend and tell your friend, okay, I'm trying to work out these issues. Do what you have to do to live in a space where, if anything else, you can at least have the honest conversations that lead to a better life.
Absolutely. And put yourself around other people who are having honest conversations. I mean, obviously that's, I think, the MO of my entire work and podcast and book. Yeah. And all of that is to be real about it so that we don't keep gaslighting ourselves. And so we can really see what we're dealing with so that we can be happy and so we can make informed decisions. And so, Lyz, where can people find you and your books?
So you can find me online, lyzlenz.com. I've got a little website that links to my books and some of my writing. I'm also pretty active on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is @LYZ. And you can find my books wherever books are sold, and I highly recommend a local independent bookstore, but no shame. We all got to get books. However, we got to get books. And so you can find them on all your major retailers. And if your audience doesn't know, bookshop.org is a great online space where you can get books, but it supports independent booksellers. So win, 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 win for everyone.
Lyz, thank you so much for talking with me today, and thank you for being so outspoken and open about the realities of motherhood and marriage and divorce. This kind of transparency is exactly what we were talking about. This is what we need and what other women need to break that gaslighting that many of us grew up with. There's some conditioning there and all of that. So you are part of the solution, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
I know. I feel like we could talk for days.
For 50 million days.
coincidentally enough, as I was editing this episode, my social media feed was going nuts with women at the end of their ropes with the partnership of their marriage. I kept seeing the themes Lyz and I talked about here showing up in post after post. And maybe it's just the groups I'm on, honest women and all. But this seems to be the norm these days. I feel like the anomaly because my husband shows up for me, and not just for our kids, but for me. But, it takes a lot of conversation, uncomfortable conversation, to get to a mutually beneficial partnership. It's not always easy or good or, of course, perfect. And it also takes a partner who is committing to respecting you, who listens and tries their best and is wired to do that. Like you aren't having to rewire them completely, because I don't think that's a thing. Also, I was having a conversation with someone else about the work of marriage. It's this idea we hear about, but I think we all have different versions of what that work actually is. I think that the work is collaborating with your partner so that both people's needs are met. Their actual deep down needs, that each person can say what's true for them and be heard, even if it's embarrassing, even if it seems needy. That both people are working toward that together, supporting each other. And I think there are people who consider the work of marriage to be trying not to be irritated with their partner. So basically trying to lie to themselves. So I'm not sold that that is the work of marriage. To me, yes, marriage is work, but it's not futile work. And I'm not an expert, but I do have a super communicative marriage, for better or for worse. If you enjoy this podcast, you will like my book, Adult Conversation, a Novel. It's a darkly comedic story about a frazzled modern mother and her therapist who go on a Thelma and Louise-style road trip to Vegas looking for pieces of themselves that motherhood and marriage swallowed up, while they are also tested and tempted to make life-altering choices. Yes, there are strippers, there's weed. One Amazon reviewer said, "From the very first page, I was howling and had to turn and read it to my husband. It was my life. The author's ability to evoke the real, raw experience of motherhood from the euphoric highs and the oh-so-lows is beyond anything I've read before. The grounding reality makes the engaging storyline exciting and cathartic as you feel yourself going along for the ride. Get this book and share it with your mom friends. Now." As always, thanks for listening.
Here I am back at the goddamn Zoom.